All right. Well, this will officially be the most comfortable podcast I've ever done to date because I'm no longer jammed in the middle of my desk over here. I'm like now sitting freely like a human. So we're gonna start this the same way we start it all the time, which is tell the people who you are and what you do.
Sounds good.
Floor is yours, buddy. Who are you
Where do I
and what
start?
is it that you do?
Well, my name is Josh Taylor. That's who I am. That's the easy part. What I do is a much longer list. I'm a sports anchor at KDK TV in Pittsburgh. I also host weekends on 93.7 The Fan, FM with the Odyssey family. Also, I do a handful of announcing work, Duquesne men's and women's basketball, mostly the games on ESPN Plus, a couple on local cable. Also high school football through 92.1 The Pickle and the Trib Live High School Sports Network. There's more, and I'm trying to think back, and there's too much to keep up with, but we'll keep with the simple stuff for now. Outside of that, I also do a couple other things too. Currently a licensed life insurance agent in Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Jersey. There's two other states I can't think of right now, but it'll come back to me later. I'll think of it soon.
If you're regional.
West Virginia, I'm licensed to West Virginia too. Yeah, pretty much within the tri-state area and maybe a couple places that border Pennsylvania. But yeah, kind of doing quite a bit, and I don't know how to sit still, I guess is a good way to put it. Add to all that, my wife and I just had I should say my wife. I just happened to be there when it happened. But my wife had our first child. We had a baby boy 9 weeks ago. So
You were a participant.
we are. Yeah, kind of. I was more of an inactive participant, but I could say I was there. But yeah, we're definitely on our toes right now. So there's just a ton happening at the current moment. So it's kind of hard to keep up with everything going on. But at the same time, I can't imagine things being any different. It's just things are going awesome right now. Probably for the first time in my adult life, I have no complaints.
Well, that's pretty amazing because we're kind of gonna have a conversation that revolves around that a little bit, but I have to start here. Are you a Cardinal?
Once a Cardinal, always a Cardinal.
God damn right. All right.
I'm sure a description or two of our own history will come up at some point.
Yeah.
Some can be discussed publicly, some not so publicly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the people that know, that's going to make them smile.
If you know, you know.
Yeah. So we've had this conversation loaded in the chamber for a while now, but like a little over a week ago, you responded to a post that I made on LinkedIn that I thought laid a pretty perfect foundation for us to finally like actually have this chat. So for just like the people listening real quick, like here's a summary of the post. Like the prevailing narrative has been that like people don't want to go back to work because they're making more on unemployment than they used to. They're too entitled, that they're lazy, and they don't have good work ethic, all of that. And then in the middle of that, an ice cream shop in Pittsburgh decided that they were going to offer a 15-hour salary or a wage, hourly wage. And immediately in like less than a week, actually the shop owner said that he stopped counting. He received over 1,000 applications in a week. And my ultimate point is that this shows that people aren't unwilling to work. The last year just recalibrated how people see their like autopilot style existence and the trajectory that they're on. So now people are valuing themselves and their time more. And I thought you chimed in with a great response about learning that for yourself in your own career. So I know I'm putting you on the spot, but like, do you remember what you said?
Yeah, basically, I've said that, I came to realize that I had to value my own time. And, because it's inevitable. Everyone, at least most of us, have to work in order to live. That's not something that's really debated. But at the same time, you shouldn't have to live to work. Work should not become your life. And I have a lot of good memories from advice that my dad used to give me. My dad's been gone for 8 years now. But one of the things he told me, and this is from the time when, now granted, I first graduated from college from Duquesne University in 2004. I went back in the fall of 2007 because kind of had this epiphany of like, you know what, I'm not where I want to be as far as my career. I want to go do something else. I kind of want to go chase my dream and be in sports media. And I told my parents, and my dad said, good, you know, you're going to work the rest of your life. You might as well do something you enjoy. And that's advice I never forgot. But at the same time, you know, trying to break into this industry, there are a lot of times when you're going to have opportunities, which are good opportunities for you. I won't deny that part. But some of them will be, you know, better paying than others. Some won't pay at all. Some won't pay a lot. And some will eventually with time. But I eventually got into this rhythm over time where, you know, I got my first opportunity in the media realm around 2008. I got my first job with WTAE. I was working there as a digital producer, eventually moved into a role where I was producing on-air content for the sports department. That led to an opportunity within Hearst, which owns WTAE. I got my first on-air opportunity with their sister station in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I was there for 2.5 years. Came back to Pittsburgh in 2014 and decided that, you know, I didn't really know what I wanted to do media-wise. I figured I'll get an opportunity somewhere. If not, then I'll try to figure it out as best as I can. Within a month of returning back to Pittsburgh, I had 2 jobs in hand. So it was kind of a crazy situation. So by 2015, by April of 2015, I'm working in radio full time and I'm working in TV part time with KDKA. And it really was a great opportunity. Now you fast forward to 2017, my full-time radio job was gone. I was working radio part-time with a different station. I had started with 93.7 The Fan, working full-time with KDKA as a producer, but still doing some part-time work with them too, as far as on-air work is concerned. And then, you know, the play-by-play announcing job started lining up, and I find myself working 4 or 5 different jobs at the same time. And, you know, some paying well, some paying not so well. And I remember a day specifically, or I should say a weekend specifically. I want to say it was either 2018 or 2019. I can't remember the year exactly, but it was right after I started working at Duquesne, doing play-by-play and color commentary for men's and women's basketball. Well, it just so happens I had a weekend where I was anchoring, you know, the sports segment for KDK TV on a Saturday night. So I was doing the 6 o'clock news, 7 o'clock news. I think back then I started doing the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock nightly sports call, 10:35 on Pittsburgh CW. And then the next morning I was hosting my radio show on 93.7 The Fan at 7 a.m. So for those who aren't familiar, the 11 o'clock news ends at 11:35. So I'd have to go home, try to get some sleep, be up between 5 and 5:30 a.m. to go do a radio show at 7. I think I did that from 7 to 11 a.m. I leave the radio station at 11 a.m. I'm headed over to Duquesne because I got a 1:30 tip-off or 2 o'clock tip-off for a basketball game at the Palumbo Center that afternoon. I did all this on maybe 4 hours of sleep. Back then, I saw it as a badge of honor because I was like, I'm the guy that could do everything. I could do TV, I could do radio, I could do play-by-play, whatever. But the fact that I did it in 24 hours, it felt like a badge of honor at the time. When it was all over, I got home and I told my wife, I was like, I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to talk. I just want to sleep and let my brain reboot. Because people think, oh, you're just sitting there talking. How tiring can it be? When your brain is firing the way it has to, when you're doing each of those jobs separately, much less all in the same 24-hour span, it uses a lot of brain power, more than you probably bargained for. But by then, I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to talk. I'm done. I'm done talking for the day.
Well,
at the time, it felt like.
That's kind of something that I want to ask you about because I never really I'm somebody that just absolutely cannot function without sleep. So whenever it comes to like grind time, it like doesn't really work for me. I can't do the overtime thing. If you get me on 2 days where it's less than maybe 6 hours of sleep, I'm done ski. I'm useless to everybody. But like, I don't know. Talk to me about like your sleep and like what your relationship with it is, because like you obviously need to like feel on whenever you're going to be on air or like whenever you're going to be calling a game or something like that. Like, so what is your relationship with sleep now? And of course that like obviously includes being a father, a new father at that.
My relationship with sleep currently is not where it should be. I'll say that much. Just father to a 9-week-old baby. My wife and I are both trying to adjust with it. But generally speaking, I got this question a couple of different times where I'm maybe speaking to students in different classes, and done kind of a mini university circuit in the Pittsburgh area. And someone asked me, what's your favorite thing to do when you're not working? And my easiest response is sleeping. Easily sleeping, because it's probably the one thing that's the hardest to come by. And for a good 2-year period of my life, probably 2017 to 2018, I wasn't sleeping a lot. So the few pockets that I had, I was shutting everything down. And you're right. You know, when you're in front of that camera, when you're behind the microphone, when you got a headset on, you have to be as sharp as you can possibly be. And I'll admit, there's days when I was not my sharpest, and my performance reflected it. And it was one of those things. It's like, you know, there's one thing where you're having just basic human error. And then there's another thing where your brain is just on autopilot and you don't remember a lot of things that happen because you're that tired or because you're just that mentally worn down. And that scared me, because there were times I'd maybe watch something back from, you know, the night before. I'd maybe look at one of the Duquesne games or maybe the highlights that they post on their social media account or on YouTube. And there was stuff I would legitimately forget saying, or I'd listen maybe to some of the clips played back from the radio show. And there was stuff I would legitimately forget from the day before, from that day. And I'm going, man, I'm killing myself here. And I don't remember a lot of what's happening, and it doesn't feel like it's worth it. So after about 2018, maybe going into 2019, I was really having this battle with myself. Like, I really need to just reassess what I'm doing here and reassess, you know, just how much my time is being doled out, because not to mention by the end of 2018, going into 2019, I'm also driving the cab just to try to, you know, make extra ends meet, because I'm trying to fill a lot of gaps here. And it was to the point where I would literally work one job, get in the cab, work a shift, or maybe work a few hours, or maybe work a shift and come home, sleep a little bit, and get ready to go to the next job. And it's like, this is not how this was supposed to be. This is not how this was structured to be. And it kind of caused a mini freak out in my mind. And I had to reassess and say, look, this is where I start having to draw the line between when I'm available, when I'm not available. And I got to start looking out for myself, because I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't healthy. You know, my weight had fluctuated really, really badly. I was the heaviest I'd ever been. There was a day when my mom looked me in the face and she goes, "You don't look well. You need to go to the doctor." And in my family, granted, I'm the youngest in my family of all my siblings, but I was the athlete of the family. Yeah, you definitely know. I was the athlete of the family. I was the one that was usually the healthiest. I was one that was probably in, you know, the best shape comparatively, because I was used to just being active and doing a bunch of different stuff. And to be in that situation where my mom is worried about my health because she says, "You don't look good," that really scared the crap out of me. I think the next day I called my doctor's office, made an appointment, went and talked to the doctor, and we put a plan together of just what I needed to do differently. And it really just centered around taking better care of myself. And once I started on that plan, it just got stronger and stronger over time. And, you know, it kind of, in a weird sort of way, it kind of kicked up a notch, you know, during the pandemic, because March of 2020, I get a phone call from one job, and I get emails from another job, and I get text message from boss another job saying, "Hey, they're shutting just about every sport down, so we don't have anything for you to do." So for 4 months, I'm at home with my wife, who eventually had become pregnant. And it was actually an eye opener, because I had nowhere to go. It wasn't like I was going out a lot. I had nowhere to be. So I was actually sleeping on a very healthy schedule. I was getting 8 hours a night, not thinking twice about it. You know, paying more attention to what I eat, because it's not like we were eating out all the time. So we weren't trying to spend a bunch of money. So we were smarter in our food choices. I dropped 30 pounds in about 4 months. I was the healthiest I'd been probably since I was in college. And it really kind of recalibrated things in my mind, where I'm thinking, man, none of this stuff ever really matters by comparison. And don't get me wrong, I'm very passionate about what I do. I'm passionate about every facet of my career. But at the same time, you know, I value my health, because when you've had good health for so long, the moment it starts to become threatened, even for a minute, you kind of kick back into, okay, this is not what I'm used to. But on top of that, you know, having my wife getting pregnant and the journey that we were having, trying to have a child, it's just like, you know what, there's certain things that are just more important. And me being here for my son is one of those things. And just me being here for my wife to get through that journey for my son to get here was one of those things. So it really just totally re-racked everything in my mind. So by the end of the summer, When I do have the opportunity to go back to work, both in TV and in radio, I started being more selective about, okay, I can work this day, but I can't work this day. I can work this shift, but I can't work this one because, these things are too close together, or I'll be I'll be gone from home too long, or I'll be working too long. And part of it is for my wife's own sanity. So she has me around the house and I'm not gone for hours at a time all day. But another part of it is it protects me too. It's because I can actually go in, do X, Y, and Z. And when my day is done, I can go home and relax and get sleep and rest, because I'm no good to anybody if I'm not running on all cylinders. And that's as a TV anchor, that's as a radio host, that's as a play-by-play announcer, that's as a public speaker, which is kind of another layer I've added onto the 7-layer, Rachel Green, dip, if you will. And it just, all that stuff adds up. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're really not any use to anybody, which is really what I came down to. So when I saw the post that you had up on LinkedIn, I'm like, it hit hard with me, because I know exactly what that's like. I know what it's like to have the job that's not paying you a lot. So you have to pick up maybe a second, or in some cases, a third job, trying to make things work. I've been there. I've been there way too recently to understand what that's like. And I just listed all this stuff that I've been doing for all this time, but that's still a reality for me, even in my own experience. So when I hear people talking about how some folks aren't willing to work for it or weren't willing to do this, and my first response is always the same. It's not that they're not willing to go to work. It's not that people aren't willing to try to earn a living. It's just that they're not willing to do it at their own expense anymore, because I'm in that boat. And as much as I love my career, I'm not willing to chase it at my own expense anymore, because what good is my career if I can't have a decent quality of life?
Right. That means the crazy part is you laid out this giant, first off, this all spanned of me asking you about sleep, and you lay out this giant perfect message. And I didn't even tell you, like, I kind of basically said like, oh, this is a great foundation for us having this conversation, but I didn't really tell you exactly what the theme was. But the theme was literally like the relationship between like work and having self-worth and meaning. Like that's what I thought, like, this would be a really good conversation to have with you about, because like I know your story generally, and I know other people's story that have also been in sports, and there are very similar paths that you guys kind of do before you get to a point where you can start choosing. And right. I think that that's like, I think that these types of things are helpful for people to hear, because I've been doing this podcast kind of telling people's professional journeys, because people just see like a business pop up and all of a sudden it's successful, and they think that that's, oh, it's an overnight success. Like, no, bitch, like, you don't fucking know how many crazy decisions, how many sleepless nights, how many jobs they had to work prior to that, how many jobs on top of jobs they were working to get to that point, to buy that freedom, to eventually get to the point where they opened that shop and took the risk. And then on top of it, now they have to operate it, like they've never operated it before. So now they have to. And so I think that that's like a great place I just think that that's a great area to expose people to, because they only see you on TV. They don't see the journey you took. You know what I mean? So like, that's, and I like to give them a little bit of the tactical too. So like, or, just kind of like, I don't know, like little interesting tidbits. Like, to me, I want to know, like, what's the most difficult thing about sportscasting you never considered or weren't expecting once you finally broke into the business?
Oh man, preparation. It's crazy how people think. I remember I got some ridiculous tweet from some guys like, oh, how hard could it be to sit around and talk sports all day? I'm like, if you don't know what you're talking about, it can be really hard. Like, it can be very difficult. The preparation side of it is really, that's really where it separates the true professionals from the ones that are just doing it because they think they can. I had to learn that. I was a guy that for so long, especially in my younger years, I relied so much off my memory. I could retain so much stuff where, I was in college and I could remember who won every Super Bowl in my lifetime. I could remember that stuff. I could remember like so many first round picks from the Steelers and Pirates and Penguins in a row. Then I hit 30 and my brain was like, hold on, dude. We got to remember root for other stuff. Like, your wife's birthday and stuff like that, like your anniversary. We don't have room for all this other stuff anymore. So, you can't just go back to the data bank like you used to. You got to start, reminding yourself. And a lot of it becomes where, it depends on the job where, the level of preparation may vary. On the TV side of things, there's a level of preparation because, yes, I have to write scripts. Yes, we have to cut video. Yes, we have to have graphics and everything, presentation, where there's a lot of pre-production stuff that, if you have one mistake, it's going to look wrong on the air and people are going to go crazy and say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah, because a graphic had a typographical error in it.
Yeah.
That's small stuff that people notice. So there's a level of preparation there that's important. On the radio side, where, I know I'm making an argument about something or I'm talking about something, well, I have to have it based in fact. I just can't go off spouting anything. So there's a level of understanding and preparation for that. The part where it's really, really, and I mean incredibly critical, is on the play-by-play side, because anything can happen in the game that you're calling, whether I'm calling, Beaver Falls versus Aliquippa in a football game with Matt Fargo and 92 on the pickle, or we're calling Duquesne men's basketball or Duquesne women's basketball. And I'll bring up a really good example. My first season, I was working with Duquesne. Duquesne had a game against St. Joseph's at the Palumbo Center. And it was a really, really challenging situation because I'm doing play-by-play. Ellis was doing color commentary. And St. Joseph's had a really serious injury, really serious knee injury. And it would happen to one of the players that was a veteran guy on the team. But this is where preparation comes in, because the injury was so serious and it was so severe that it took quite a while. It didn't take like a couple minutes for them, the trainers, to say, hey, are you okay? And they help him up and walk him off. No, it took almost 20 minutes for the trainers to realize something was wrong. They sent an ambulance from Mercy Hospital. They had to come treat this kid on the floor, give him an air cast, get him stretchered out, and then get him out of there. So it took some considerable time. So we're on the air. We're live here. And this is a game that's showing on local cable. So Ellis and I are looking at each other like, all right, we got to fill some time here. So it took us having the preparation that we have to have notes and information on each player, whether they're playing 30 minutes a game or they don't see the game at all because they're riding the bench. But you got to have that stuff lined up. So we ended up spending 5 or 10 minutes, trying to tell the story of this particular kid who's laying on the court injured, who, by the way, had a pretty interesting story. I want to say he was a grad student who had been a starter on the team for maybe 3 years. He's in his last year of eligibility. And he tells the coach, hey, I'll become the sixth man. I'll take myself out of the starting lineup so you can get this other kid in there and have a better chemistry for the team. And this is a guy that the entire team thoroughly respected for a lot of different reasons. So when this kid's hurt, everybody on that bench is concerned. And it was to the point where they're stretching him off and his teammates are crying. They're in tears because of the nature of this injury and how much they cared about this kid. But it's one of those things where if you don't know the story about that kid, if you don't do the prep and find out the information, you can't tell that story properly. So people can't process what they're seeing. So when everything's said and done, Duquesne ended up coming back and winning the game. And then been a very exciting second half, but the injury happened in the first half. But when it was all over, maybe a week or two later, I was working my next game, and our executive producer at the time said, hey, you guys got a lot of good feedback from the guys at the cable station that were working this game. They said, you guys did a really good job handling that situation. And for me, it's just like, thank God I did the prep. Thank God I put the work in ahead of time and just knew everything I needed to know, or at least, most of what I could fit into a certain parameter, because it's not like you can walk around a book of information all day. But there was a level of, hey, you need to be prepared for anything, because I tell people all the time, sports is the original reality TV. You don't know what could happen at any given moment. You have to be ready for the things that are happening on the court that are expected, but you also have to be ready for some of the stuff that's unexpected, and injuries are one of those things. And if we hadn't prepared for it, Lord knows what we would have talked about during that time frame. So it is important. But I say all that to say this, because I think one thing people don't really realize is when you do what I do, credibility is important. Credibility is important, and context has power. So you have to understand what you're dealing with in context, and you have to be able to understand that what you're saying is going out to a mass audience of people. And sometimes the only impression they may have is something you said. So you have to be prepared with what you're saying, because you don't know who's hearing it and you don't know how it could affect them down the road.
Yeah. And I get that, because I'm obviously just doing this podcast or whatever, but like just being on the record, like what, even when I was blogging, I would start to say something and then I'd be like, but I don't really know that for sure. And I'd end up Googling it, just to make sure,
Right.
because like the last thing you want is your name is on it. You're on the record, you're on the internet. So like, there's no taking that back. Once it's up somewhere. And you want to be on the right side of history. So, you kind of have to do your work. And I try not to speak out of school as much as possible, which is awesome to be the guy kind of asking the questions rather than like, let me tell you a little thing or two about a thing. But your story about, the prep is like super important. I actually had this like lined up already. What's the difference between the prep? I'm sure it's different between doing like an anchor spot or hosting a radio show, or, getting ready for, game calling or being on a panel. Like, what's that prep like?
On the TV side, it's a little bit different. A lot of it is just, you're using sometimes using a lot of stuff that's pre-prepared, that the media relations people, in the case of the pro teams, or the SIDs, the sports information directors, in the case of the college teams, are providing you. A lot of times that's stuff that's coming in email. It's stuff you might be able to find on that team's website. And a lot of it is just clarification. Some of it is, some basic research. We very seldom have to dig that deep, because a lot of it really is just, we're either previewing something or we're telling you what's happening after the fact, as far as, the TV anchoring side of things. On the radio side, it's kind of the same thing, but maybe you're going a little bit more depth. Maybe I'm recapping a Penguin game with A.G. Carducci, so I need to know what happened as far as not just the box score, but I probably need to have watched that game to know what took place. I need to watch the game to know that, Jason Zucker and Crystal Tank took penalties in less than a minute to take the Penguins from being on the power play to now killing a penalty, because that might have been a critical moment in the game. And now we have to discuss that on the radio and tell you why that was bad, or why, it might have handcuffed the Penguins in that series against the Islanders.
I'm still mourning.
A different dynamic. Most of us are
Still mourning.
On the play-by-play side of it, it's a lot deeper. It's a lot more intensive. It's a lot more detailed. You got to know where a kid went to school. You might have to know, or as far as the pros, you might have to know where a player went to school. As far as college, you might need to know what city this kid's from, what high school they went to. In some cases, if they're local, what coach they played for locally, because that's something that your local audience is going to relate to. So you have to have that kind of information at your fingertips, not only as far as preparing you to maybe learn it, but to have it in a moment's notice, because you might have to go to a set of notes and say, hey, well, this kid's shooting 70% from the line. Let's see what happens when he shoots 2 here. So it does happen where, having that preparation does help you in context in the moment. So play-by-play is a lot more extensive. I know when I'm doing high school football games with Matt Fargo, we had this ritual for a good while. I hope we bring it back now that high school games would probably be along the same lines as they were before the pandemic.
Right.
Our ritual was we would meet, I want to say it was every Tuesday afternoon, either Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. We'd meet at Bigham Tavern over some wings, because it was their wing day. We'd meet in the afternoon, have some wings, and we'd do our prep for the Friday night game. We'd do it there. It's like, all right, we got prep day. We'll hang out. We'll have a couple beverages and some wings, and we'll plan out what we're going to do. But that was our prep time. We both had our information that we had, whether it was news clippings or whatever we're paying attention to. And that's how we set up how we were going to do the broadcast. And maybe we were trying to set up an interview with the coach pregame or whatever have you. And it was just one of those rituals. I mean, granted, we had some, had some fun eating some wings too, which is always a good part. But
hey, I'm not far away. Give me a ring. You know what I'm saying? Like,
we've done that before. Stranger things have happened in shorter circumstances, a shorter time frame. So I'll take you up on that. But it's just one of those examples of, there has to be an initiative of, let's make sure we know what we're talking about here to have everything accurate, because there's so much information that flies at any given moment, and you need to have all of it, or at least as much as you can, as accurate as possible.
Did you have a skill set that you learned independently that you didn't really think would be applicable to doing sports, like to being in the sports industry, and then actually became very useful?
I never thought in a million years that having a drama background would prepare me for my career in broadcasting, because I'm from a family now. Most of us are musically inclined. I played instruments. My sisters played instruments. My brother was a drummer. My sister and I were involved in musical theater. We acted and sang on stage. I mean, you were around for some of the stuff I did in college.
I've seen you do Put It on the Ritz.
I'm putting on the Ritz. That was probably one of the weirdest things I ever did. I just think putting on the Ritz in a show in college with a ladies' man accent from Saturday Night Live, which is probably the most difficult thing I've ever done. But, just from that perspective, I never thought having that kind of experience as a performer would really translate into my career in broadcasting. But the truth of the matter is the focus that comes with it. I remember the first time when I was going to do some anchoring, and I was anchoring at Duquesne, of all places. I'm in class at Duquesne in my anchoring and announcing class. And I actually wasn't freaked out. I wasn't nervous, because I remember being nervous. I performed at the Benedum Center, at the Kelly Awards as a freshman in high school. That's pressure. That's freaking out. You're like, wait a minute, I'm at the freaking Benedum here about to perform for this award show. That's one of the things you think you remember. You're going, wow, I've been through a lot worse. Just stuff like that goes through your mind, and you remind yourself, like, you've been through some things here and there. You've dealt with stage fright before. You've dealt with, just the dynamic of being in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people. And it kind of helps you shrink the moment down. And I've had people ask me, how do you not get nervous when you're anchoring or you're reporting? I said, when I'm anchoring, it's actually pretty simple, because I've been on stage with hundreds and thousands of people watching me. When I'm doing TV, I'm in a studio with maybe at the most 4 people, but it's me, 3 or 4 people in the room with me and a camera. It's the easiest thing I have to do, because literally all I have to do is look at the camera and talk to the camera. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to sing the entire set list of guys and dolls here on stage in front of hundreds of people. I'm sitting here telling you about whether or not the Penguins won or not, or, who had the most strikeouts in the Pirate game. And I'm doing it facing a camera, and I'm not doing it in front of people asking me questions all at the same time, or cheering or applauding while I'm doing it. It's a lot different by comparison. So it allowed me to scale that whole thing down. And, you hear people talk about, shrinking the moment, or if you've ever seen For Love of the Game with Kevin Costner, he talked about clearing the mechanism.
Yep.
That helped me do that as a performer, because it reminds you, like, hey, it's a big moment, but you're here for a specific purpose. Shrink it down, focus on what you have to do. And I never thought that kind of background would help me that much, but it's made all the difference.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because I've had people ask me about, like, how's podcasting, like how is it knowing that you're recording and everything like that, and you're having like a conversation, because I largely try to not edit unless we say something crazy.
That's the beauty of it, though. You can always go back and edit.
You can always go back and edit, but
live is a different story.
Exactly. But people are like, how do you feel being in front of the camera and recording and having this conversation? Aren't you nervous? Like, you're going to be putting out in front of people. And I was like, got to be honest, I think me being in a band way back when, and like singing in front of people and performing in front of people and being on a microphone, like this kind of already broke me in. Like I was never nervous having the conversation per se, or being on camera per se. It was the fact that I didn't know how to interview somebody, or that like I didn't exactly know the ins and outs of interviewing, which I need to give you some props for, because we had a chat over last summer that really changed the way I did this, because you told me that, like, it's about getting them to tell the story. It's about asking them something that has like meat to it, instead of like looking for basically me providing all the context and them like answering whether they agree or disagree or something like that, like, or giving a small answer rather than like set them up to tell something with like a bunch of context that, like, along with it. So I have to give you props for that, because that definitely helped me, and it's helped the way that I sculpt my questions ever since. So I thank you for that in a massive way.
Anytime, man. I'm always glad to pass on things that I've learned from other people. One of the cool things when you've been around people who do things well is that you pick up small pieces from them. And I've been able to work with people, like Guy Junker, like Bob Pompiani, like John Burton, who were just really good at doing specific things. And the one thing I've picked up from different people, I had a sports director I worked with. His name was Mike Jocks when I worked in Arkansas, my buddy Jocko. Jocko had this really great ability to make anybody he was talking to feel comfortable. When Jocko is interviewing you, you're just two people talking. 9 times out of 10, he may not know that person very well, but it was like he was talking with an old friend. He just knew how to make that person feel so comfortable. So when he asked them a question, it just came right out. Like there was no hesitation with the answer, regardless of what the question was. It was just that ability to make the other person feel that comfortable where they can share information with you, whether it was sensitive information or not, whether it had a personal attachment with them or not. And I learned that just by working with him. So when I came back to Pittsburgh, I'm working in radio now, and I'm working in a different kind of dynamic where I'm interviewing a lot of people and I'm not interviewing them face to face. So it's not the same dynamic where I'm interviewing somebody face to face and there's a camera there, as opposed to I'm interviewing somebody, even though we're live on the air, but it's over radio airwaves. And I can't really make that kind of visual connection with that person. So I have to try to find other ways to make that person comfortable. Now, there were some times I did do some in-person interviews, and, it was kind of another dynamic of, I got to try to find a way to make this person feel more comfortable to give me information. But it's not like you're getting information from them as much as they are telling a story. And when you look at it from that perspective, especially being a news reporter or a news anchor, we tell stories all the time. It's what we're used to. So when you get to the radio side of it, you're trying to get somebody else, if you're interviewing them or for a podcast for that matter, you're trying to have them tell a story. So as opposed to having everything lined up and you tell the story yourself, now you're just looking for the breadcrumbs to help them follow along and have them tell the story. And a lot of people have great stories to tell. It's just a matter of either A, finding out what the story is, or B, having them in a position where they can tell it and they can pull it out. And once you do that, everything else just opens right in front of you, and it's an entirely different dynamic. I tell people all the time, and one of the best interviewers to watch do what they do, watch Howard Stern. Watch any Howard Stern interview. He can ask that person about anything, and they are just giving it over. Oprah's the same way. Oprah has this ability to just personalize every conversation. And a key example, and I know this is kind of polarizing, but her interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, it was one of those things where you would have thought they were friends for 20, 30 years, but they're telling really important, intimate details of their lives. And Oprah's end of it, instead of it seeming like it was an interview that was being taped, it just seemed like a conversation that might happen anywhere between two friends or two family members that are concerned about each other's well-being. You have to have that ability to not only personalize it, but make it to the point where that person is able to relate to you, but also feel comfortable talking to you. And those are two of the masters of doing it.
Yeah. So that's interesting that you brought that up, because one of the things that I quickly learned was like, and not that I can just like, the people that I have on aren't exactly like, don't have like Wikipedia pages or something like that. But I've heard interviews where there was no work put into it, right? Like the interviewer literally just went to their Wikipedia page and is like, oh, I saw that you do X, Y, and Z. Like, tell me a joke, comedian. Or like, you know what I mean? Like it was so just phoned in, and just like, of course the person on the other side, whoever's being interviewed, is like, Jesus Christ, I did this. Like, this is supposed to be my media. Like, this is supposed to be why I woke up ass early in the morning to do the morning show. Like, this person didn't even put any work into it. So yeah, that rings very true to me, as far as, because that's what this whole thing is. Like, to me, I don't necessarily want to interview you so much as I want to just have a conversation with you. I have some points that I want to hit, but like, this is what I quickly realized was, if I'm not having a conversation I like, what the fuck is the point of doing this?
Exactly. I have varying degrees of how, I try to set the tone, so to speak. there were a lot of situations where I'm interviewing high school kids, teenagers in front of a camera about the sport that they play. And when you're 14, 15 years old, you're just worried about what you have for homework, playing your game and going out with your friends maybe during the weekend. You're not thinking about a bunch of other stuff. You're not worried about what you're going to say to the guy that's coming to interview on TV. That's not going through your mind. But then they get there and you see this grown person with this camera and asking you questions, and you're like, all right, now what? So my thing when I would interview high school kids was, hey, do not worry about the camera. We're just two dudes talking. Yeah. And it made it easier. It's like, I'm just going to ask you a couple questions. You tell me what's on your mind and we'll go from there. Don't worry about the camera. Like, don't worry about if you mess up, it's tape. We can fix it. We can edit stuff. Don't worry about that. Like if you mess up, I can edit it out because I'm going to mess up. So I'm going to edit myself out too. So don't worry about that. And it's just the process of making that person more comfortable, because you want them to be as real and authentic as possible. You want them to be as comfortable as they can be, because it makes the conversation a lot more natural and a lot more fluid. To your point about doing research for interviews, there was a point in my radio career where I was interviewing featured dancers for one of our sponsors who happened to own a gentleman's club. And these were features that were either career dancers or they were adult actresses. And it's like, all right, I got to be ready to ask a porn star questions about what she's been doing recently. And it involved a level of research. And thank God for social media, because sometimes it kind of helps you, read between the lines or kind of take some of the legwork out of it, so to speak. But I would actually come in with questions, very tailored to, hey, I know you're working on this. I know you've been doing this. I know you've been at this award show. Like, what was that like? And it kind of turned into a fun sequence where I was interviewing two different adult stars that were they were really great friends. They were best friends. And one told me a story the first time I interviewed her about the other. So when the other came in, I said, hey, your friend told me this story about the two of you in Vegas at this award show. What happened? And she's like, oh my God, I gotta tell you the story. So it turned into like this whole series of events where I'm getting this story from two different perspectives. So the next time I see the first one, I'm like, okay, last time I saw you, you told me this story about you and her together. Have you hung out since then? And what happened? And she had a different story. And it's like, wow. And it was just research off one fact that, hey, I see that you two are close friends. What's that dynamic like? And it turned into this series of stories that I learned. So you never know where the information can take you. So if you're just doing some of the small, it doesn't have to be a lot. You don't have to know someone's whole life story. But if you can find 2 or 3 points to say, hey, this looks like I might get something good out of this, let me ask this question. Or if it's going towards a general theme that you're looking towards, you're like, okay, this fits what I want to talk about. So let's see where this goes. If you can do those small bits of homework ahead of time, those are the ones that like they turn into the ones you just hit right out of the park, and they become a lot more fun. Plus it kind of takes the edge off too, because you're like, I don't know what I'm going to talk to this girl about, because it's you want to say something like, oh yeah, you have a really nice chest area, You don't want to just do something that, that ridiculous and barbaric, because you sound, first of all, it's ridiculously unprofessional. And second of all, you look like a creeper. So it's like, okay, let me remind myself that I'm talking to another human being here and we're just having a conversation. And when you're able to,
right. She's not on my computer right now.
Right. So when you're able to shrink that down into the thing of, let me just have some questions and some things to talk about with this person and treat them like a normal human being that might have something interesting to tell me. When you boil it down to that, it's a lot easier, and it ends up being pretty fun if you get the right information.
Yeah. Jesus. Yeah.
You've heard some of the other stories.
I did. I think I'm going to pivot a little bit. So you've already covered, like, kind of in like a quick shot, a bunch of the step, like kind of like a quick sequence of like where you started and how you got to where you are now. But like, I like the deeper, more contextual version. And what I kind of like to hear is like, along your professional journey, like what were the really difficult decisions? What were the big obstacles? Like, what were the things that people don't think of when they think of somebody pursuing sports, or when they see a guy on TV who just looks like he's like got the snappy suit and he's got the makeup and he's got everything? Like, what are the things that you had to do along the way that people don't know about? And I guess you can plant the flag of wherever you want that story to begin and take me to basically where you are, like at least to where like you feel like fuck, I really made it. Like I'm to a point where I'm able to make some choices now.
There's a few things, and it really, all of them came with time. I think the first big decision that I had to make was, do I want to leave everything I've ever known and loved for my entire life, 30 plus years, and move to a place that I've never been to, never even driven through? That's literally 1,000 miles from everything I've ever known and loved, and be pretty much out there by myself for the sake of pursuing a career. That was the toughest decision.
Which is Arkansas, by the way,
which is Arkansas.
Yeah.
I had never driven through Arkansas. I'd seen it on the map a bunch of times. I knew who the Razorbacks were. I remember in '94 when they won the national championship with Nolan Richardson as their head coach and Corliss Williamson and Scotty Thurman. I remember those details, to where I had to make this decision if I wanted to move to Fayetteville and become the person covering, the University of Arkansas basketball, football, and every other sports team they have. By making that decision, by the way, the information that I retained in my mind, getting to move to Fayetteville, having a chance to cover the Razorbacks, interviewing Nolan Richardson in his home on his ranch in Fayetteville, and playing with his Great Dane for about a half hour, which is one of the most exciting experiences of my lifetime. And also meeting Scotty Thurman, who hit the game-winning shot in 1994 to beat Duke, because I grew up a Duke fan. And the first thing I told him when I interviewed him is, I was like, yeah, I grew up a Duke fan. So I remember crying after you hit that shot. He goes, man, that was the greatest moment of my life. He was like, so the fact that it made you that sad makes it even better. And we shared a laugh about it. And it came to happen that Scotty Thurman was one of the coolest dudes I ever got the chance to talk to. And Nolan Richardson was he's just a gracious human being. So knowing those little bit of tidbits of the place I'd never been to, and making that decision ultimately to say, this is what you worked for. This is what you've wanted to do all along. Now you have the opportunity. I think the decision really became cemented for me when I got a chance to talk to Guy Junker about it. Guy's one of my mentors. I started out producing for him in TV and in radio. And we had worked together for so long. And he's like, look, he's like, as much as I love working with you, I love you as a person. I said, I know, Guy. He said, as much as I enjoy working with you, take this job and get the hell out of here. This is what you were born to do. You've worked so hard to get to this point. You've given some of the best years of your life to get to this stage in your career. Take it and go. This is an experience that when you look back at it, you'll relish it the rest of your life. And he was 100% correct. It was one of the best decisions I ever made, was to go and take that job in Fayetteville. I was there for 2.5 years. And that, in some ways, I still miss living there. I definitely miss the weather for certain, because I moved there in, late December, early January, and it was 60 degrees and people were out golfing when I moved into my apartment complex. that I miss. But there were just some really awesome experiences that I had there. I talked about Nolan Richardson and being on his ranch. That's one of them. It's not every day you get to hang out in the Hall of Fame coach's house at his invitation. That's insane. But just the experiences that I had there and the things I was able to do and the things that enhanced my career so much more were part of that decision where, it's a life decision, but if you make the right one, it makes it better. It doesn't, make it worse, or it doesn't make it regrettable. Another thing I had to learn was just the value of the decisions you make in your own life. When you're working on the news, one of your biggest priorities is to not be in the news. You do not want to find yourself in a situation where you're getting in trouble doing XYZ, or you're around other people that are doing XYZ, because if something happens with them and, it becomes a big issue, then you're wrapped up in that. And for me, it was like, hey, I got to be careful who I hang around. I got to be careful of the company I keep, because you don't want to have something happen that you were privy to when you're not supposed to be in the news. You're supposed to be on it, talking about what happened, not being involved in what happened. So just from a personal standpoint of just personal responsibility and making the right decisions. And there was a time when that almost caught up to me. I had an incident where I'd gotten a speeding ticket, and it was maybe a few months after that I'd moved there. But in between when I got the ticket and when my court date happened, I moved addresses. and I forgot to forward my mail. So my summons for my court date went to my old address, and I never got it at my new one. So my court date came and went. I didn't know when it was. I'd totally forgotten about it. So another day, I get pulled over in a different town, but in the same county. Officer looks up my driving history and says, "Hey, you have an outstanding ticket in this town, and there's a warrant for your arrest." I spent the night in jail. Local sports anchor, spent the night in jail because of a speeding ticket that I had forgotten, that I didn't receive because I had forgotten to forward my mail and, update my information. And a competing station found out about it and actually tweeted it out. And it was all over the place. So you had people calling my station saying, "Hey, did you know your sports anchor was arrested?" And it was to the point where, God bless our producers and the fact that I was friends with them. One of them kind of joked, they're like, "Yeah, our sports anchor's a badass. Thank you for calling us and telling us good night." Just kind of hung up the phone. But, it looked so bad on the surface. I'm like, yeah, I got a speeding ticket that I didn't get the summons for because I moved. So I went to my second court date, got everything straightened out. I told the judge, like, "Hey, I got my ticket. I moved. Had I known, I would have been here. Whatever. We got it sorted out. I paid my fine and got everything going." And it was just a matter of, that's a lesson learned. You have to make the right decisions because you don't want to have those things come back to hurt you in the end. And it's not like it was anything that serious. I mean, it's not like I'm out here trying to, rob somebody or anything like that.
Right.
But something that small as a speeding ticket and not forwarding my mail became a much bigger situation than it needed to be. So personal responsibility becomes really important. The third thing, and I would say probably the thing I remember most, is that everything you've done previously, you may discount some of those things, but all the experiences you have, they bring you to the point you're at now. You'll get to the point where you have to make a decision, and you might have done something before that you have to harken back to say, "Hey, I've done this before. I've been in this position where I know how to handle the situation," or I've taken some things from that experience that allow me to handle the situation. So something that might have been unforeseen, you can draw back from something else you've been through and say, "Hey, I'm more prepared for this than I think I am."
Yeah, like drama, right?
Exactly. Like the drama being ready for being on camera thing. But, sometimes you have to give yourself more credit for your journey because you've been through some things and you think you come to something that you don't know how to handle. There's always something you can draw from, either something or someone that you can draw from to help you get through just about anything. And I say just about with a very specific asterisk, but, there are always points and experiences in your life or people that you've come across that can help you get through some of the unforeseen things. You just have to, remember it. And once again, give yourself credit for your journey because it helped you get to this point. And in some cases, it can help you get to the next part too.
Do you have any issues breaking back into the Pittsburgh market?
No, strangely no. And I think part of it was just luck because when I got back to Pittsburgh, I got a phone call and I had two different places that I had worked previously that were interested in bringing me back. They had heard I just moved back and they're like, "Hey, we got jobs available if you want them." And I'm like, "Sure." I ended up landing with Trib Live Radio, and largely because I had done some work with Trib Live Radio before as like a fill-in host or, a co-host or whatever. So I worked with a lot of those guys. When I came back, it was literally the same crew that I remembered. I was working with the same producer, Mike Barker. I was working with the same guys on the morning show and Guy Junker and Ken Laird. I was producing for them. And then once he got added to the roster, Tim Benz comes in, whom I had actually produced for in TV. So these were all guys that I had known previously. So I might have had the easiest reinsertion into a market because I went back to a place where I already knew everybody involved. And that's where the power of relationships comes in, because you never know who you'll come across later on down the road. It just so happened that the guys that I had worked with before and had such a great relationship with, I get to work with them again. And it was like being around old friends to the point where, a year or two in, I'm like, man, you couldn't have asked for an easier transition. It felt like sometimes like I was stealing the paycheck because people would ask me, "What do you do?" I'm like, "I sit in a chair and argue about sports with my friends for a living." That's what I do. That's what it felt like because that's kind of how it was. And I was lucky in that regard where I had guys that knew me so well and that I knew so well. and that they really just helped make that transition so much easier. So I probably didn't have it as easy as most. But then on the TV side of things, I got to work with people who were super inviting and just really, really accommodating, and, getting to have that mentor relationship with Bob Pompiani and meeting him for the first time. And he says, "Oh yeah, I saw your tape. You do great work." And I'm like, "What?" Bob Pompiani, like the freaking goat in the sports media market in this town,
Because
is telling me he
pomping
likes
ain't
my
easy,
work.
baby.
Bob, it ain't easy. And I've worked with that man. I've produced with him, and I've seen how his schedule is. And you want to talk about people who can function on little rest? No one does it better than that man. Bob Pompiani.
I was literally thinking of him when I crafted that question.
Yeah, I mean, people joke pumping ain't easy. That man, he makes it look easy. But having him as a mentor to just learn how, not just how to do certain things, but how he conducts himself just in public and where he goes and how he handles every obligation that he has. It's a masterclass, man. If you didn't know how to be a public figure before, hang out with him for a week. You'll figure it out. It's crazy because, we would have days where we'd have our dinner break and we just like walk from the KDK studio downtown. We'd go to Market Square and get something to eat. And I'm like, if you want to feel little as a person, go hang out with somebody that everybody knows when they see them. Go out to dinner with Pomp. Everyone's like, "Oh, hey, Bob Pompiani." And I'm like, I'm going to shrink over here in the corner because
I gotta pee. Gotta go.
I'm like, oh, I'll wait for people to know this guy. So when I got to the point where I had been around a couple of years and now I'm out with my wife and I might be like at Walmart or the grocery store or something, and someone recognizes me and my wife is just like, "Is it always like that?" I'm like, "Not always, but for the most part." She's like, "Does it ever stop being weird?" I'm like, "Not really. You just learn how to handle it better." But I think seeing him in that element and how well he handles it, and also being with Guy Junker, you would never know that Guy Junker was, that recognizable and had been doing this for decades and having been, that identifiable by how he interacts with people. And it taught me to, just because I do X, Y, Z doesn't mean I should just assume that everyone knows who I am. So I go out not assuming that anybody's going to recognize me. So to this story, I'm out getting dog food for my dog at PetSmart. I'm walking out with this big bag of dog food on my shoulder. Some guy's like, "Hey, Josh, what do you think the Penguins are going to do tonight?" I'm like, "I think they're going to win." And they're like, "You think they win the series?" I'm like, "We'll see what happens when they go back to Nassau." I'm glad I answered that question that way because we saw what happened when they went back to Nassau County Coliseum. They did not win the series. But I'm walking out of a pet store with a mask on, not expecting anybody in the world to recognize who I was. But it's one of those things where you never assume anything because the moment you do assume, you're probably going to embarrass yourself and people are going to think, "Oh, what a jerk," because, he just thinks he's entitled to stuff. I've been able to work with people who have taught me how to conduct myself, and it makes all the difference in the world. But having that kind of mentor relationship with Bob Pompiani made that transition easier at KDK. And it's been good since then. So it's kind of hard to realize that, in a couple months, it'll be 7 years since I've been back in Pittsburgh. And it disappeared. I came back and picked up my career and got married, and now I have a kid, and, life has totally resumed itself and kept moving. And I think it's largely because of just having a really good situation where I was comfortable with people that I was working with, whether I knew them or not. And then having the lessons that I've learned along the way to kind of make that transition easier. And I wouldn't have imagined it going any smoother in my mind. I couldn't have planned it any better.
I mean, Christ, you couldn't have answered that question any better. But I would be remiss to not point out so COVID times obviously threw a curveball into literally everybody's lives. And then, clearly you're passionate about sports and you made all these sacrifices to do literally everything you've done, everything you just talked about to get to where you are. And there's like a whisper in the air of maybe this career, is possibly over because we don't know what the future is. We at that point in time, everybody was talking about it as though like bubonic plague 2.0. So, speaking of the relationship between work and having self-worth and meaning, you decided to like lean into adaptability. How did you end up deciding like, I'm going to get certified for insurance, and what was, I guess, like, what about that path to you was fulfilling?
It came down to a relationship I started with a friend of my brother and my sister-in-law. My brother had just graduated. This was December of 2019. He had just graduated. He just got his master's degree. And they had a little dinner for some other people in the family. And I met a friend of another couple friend of him and my sister-in-law. And we happened to be at the same table. And he was a guy that liked to talk. I was a guy that liked to talk. My brother was like, you guys get along great. You both talk a lot. You'll get along just fine. So we get to discussing, and we figure out, okay, we're both from Pittsburgh. And we both grew up near the same side of town. And then we realized, hey, wait a minute. I went to high school with your sister. It's like, oh my God. So that we found we have these parallels in common. But then, he was telling me about what he did for a living. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. And we developed a relationship where we became friends. And at one point, I kind of became interested in what he did because he worked in insurance. I needed a life insurance policy. So we originally met about that. But then immediately we transitioned into how he does what he does, why he does what he does. And it resonated with me on a personal level, just because of my own experience in my family. And I'm sitting there going, okay, well, at least I have something where if I need to use this as an option, I can kind of reach back and find it. I can come to this guy, and, I knew he'd be a great mentor. And that's exactly what happened. It's exactly how it went down. The pandemic hits, and I'm like, you know what? I need to try to figure out what else I'm going to do in case I don't have this to lean back on again. So he and I started to work together. We have built a great personal relationship as well as a great professional relationship. Around the time when this summer started to end and I got more opportunities in TV and radio, I went back to doing that. I kind of put the insurance business on hold just because I'm like, look, I have an opportunity now to go back to doing what I was doing, but it's still there if I need it. I can still reach back and do those things. And I came up with the conscious decision that not only did I want to put it to the side because of having the opportunity to go back in the sports media in August or September, but I also knew that things were coming down the pike with my wife being pregnant. And I'm like, you know what? I do not want to try to go through this entire experience of being a dad for the first time and trying to have this ridiculously hellish experience of having so much in a career and trying to do all this other stuff at the same time. I'm like, nope, we're scaling this down. We're going to make this simple. I want to make my life a lot less complicated. So I came up with the idea of, okay, I'll work a schedule here, and this is all I'm going to do for the time being. I'm going to take small bites of this elephant. So when I got the opportunity to go back to do TV, I'm like, okay, I'll do TV. But what I'm going to do is I'll work a couple on-air shifts. I'll make myself available for that. And the rest of the time, I'm going to spend with my family. I'm going to spend it with my wife. I'm going to spend it helping her with whatever she needed. And it was another one of the best decisions I ever made because it created a work-life balance that I've never had before. And thankfully, in her position, she works from home. She's on maternity leave now, but she was working from home at the time. But I was able to put together a schedule where I can work 2-3 days a week. And, the pay I'm getting is matching what she's getting. And I'm not working full-time hours. And now I have time flexibility. I'm able to be with her when she needs me. I'm able to help take care of my son now that he's here because I'm not chewing up all my time and everything else. And it really was just the perfect storm of, having a work-life balance and making a decent living and having time to do everything. And it's one of those things where if you never experienced it before, when it happens, it's like the best description I can come up with. It's like the beginning of The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy's in Kansas and everything is in black and white. And then the tornado happens and the house gets picked up and it lands in Oz. And when she walked out the door, everything's in Technicolor. That's what it feels like because you didn't know this world was possible. And so having the pandemic happen when it did, in conjunction with the circumstances in my own life, with my wife trying to, bring a child into the world and a couple other personal situations just in my family. We lost an aunt and an uncle that both died of COVID. I lost a cousin that I grew up with. He was a couple months older than me. And you know him because we all
Yep.
went to college together. And that was something that changed my life. It changed my perspective on like, what am I doing? And even before the pandemic happened, I lost a colleague. We had written a couple books together. We'd done radio together. He was a year older than me. And you're sitting there going, these are people that were really important to either my career or my personal life. And these people are gone. And there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing I do in my career, no money I make can change what can happen to your life in the blink of an eye. So it gave me a whole new understanding and appreciation of I need to look at this differently. I need to look at what I'm doing, and I need to look at how I spend my time. And this is totally independent of the fact that, you know, my dad, we lost my dad in a work-related accident. And there's so many different things and lessons I've learned over time. It's just like, I have to slow down and reassess what I'm dealing with here. And now I have a son, and it's like, you know what? No, it reminds me of a line that I would have never imagined had so much of a bearing in my life had I heard it before. But hearing it now in this particular time frame made it so much more important. It's from Avengers Infinity War. If you remember when Tony Stark and Steve Rogers go back to, I want to say it was the SSR camp in New Jersey, and they're trying to get the Tesseract. And Tony Stark runs into his dad. He runs into Howard Stark. And he's like, oh, yeah, my dad taught me a lot of things. And Howard Stark says, oh, what's one of those things? And Tony says, my dad taught me that no amount of money ever bought back a minute of time. And you realize just that scene alone, having rewatching that scene when I'm about to become a dad and having the career situation that I was in and just how my time was just stretched everywhere, that scene alone just completely rewired my brain. And I'm like, I need to really re-examine how my life is structured and what's important to me.
That's an interesting
and once
quote.
I got that, it was different.
That's an interesting quote that you picked out, because I know that when I heard that quote come out of that movie, I had heard it kind of in a different way, which was, money buys you access, but it doesn't bring back the moments you missed. And
exactly.
So that it's interesting that you brought that up. But you've been really leaning into the whole fatherhood thing, and I would be remiss to not bring this up. I guess, like, how has fatherhood changed your perspective of like your, or maybe like, yeah, like what has fatherhood done to the concept of self-worth, self-purpose to you?
It made me realize that there's more to me than just where I live or what I wear or what I do for a living. Because when I come home from work, and when I'm working, whether a Friday or a Saturday night, or even if I'm doing a Sunday morning radio show, you know, whether I'm coming home on a Sunday afternoon or like late Sunday morning, or if I'm coming back at like 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning after anchoring the 11 o'clock news, when I get home and I walk in the house and I see my son does not care how my day was. He does not care how the show went. He does not care who won or lost. It does not matter to him. And I've heard athletes talk about it before. I heard LeBron James talk about it before. Marc-Andre Fleury, I thought, when he was still a Penguin, had a really interesting thing about it. And he talked about having, you know, when he had his first child, he said it really changed his perspective of how he approached the game, because he said he used to take everything so personally. He would take losses to heart. He'd go home and it would bother him for hours at a time. He said, but after he had his first daughter, he'd get home. He said, I get home, I see my daughter. The rest doesn't matter. The game doesn't matter. All of it kind of melts away, because you realize it does not matter anymore. That is your world. Like, everything you do might be for their benefit, but when you get back and see, wait, this is what's important. This is my world right here. It does two things. One, it makes you forget the stuff that doesn't matter, but it also reminds you, this is the end game. This is your purpose right here. I come home and I remember, all right, this is what's important. Now that I'm home, my time is about him, and everything I'm doing while I'm here is focused on him, and, you know, making this world better for him. So where he gets to my age, or gets to the point where I am, he's able to do things better or differently than I did, if necessary, if that's the case. But yeah, that's the one thing I've learned. It's like, your purpose is greater than just what you're doing in the moment. And when you figure that out, especially when you have that opportunity to do something that's greater than you. And it's another thing that comes back to another piece of advice that my dad gave me. I remember talking to him about, just the pressure of everybody saying, when are you going to get married? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? You and your wife have been together for a long time. When I first met you, me and my wife had just started dating. So think about that. That's how long it's been.
Yeah.
And it's been what, 15, 16 years?
15 years, something like that.
Exactly.
Years.
And over the course of time, everybody's like, oh, so, when you guys are going to get married, you guys are getting older, when you're going to have kids. And I told my dad, I'm like, I don't think people understand sometimes just everything I'm trying to do and what I'm working towards. And my dad said, look, he said, the moment you give her a ring, it's no longer about you. It's about her and everybody that comes after her, whether it's children, grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're not ready for that, then you're not ready to have a family. Because the moment you have a family, it's now about them. And that came back to me. That harkened back to me when my son was born. He showed up. I'm like, all right, dude, it's all about you now. And that resonates with everything. And, I see him and I'm like, I wish I could go back to where he was and tell that kid that was me and say, hey, this is everything you're going to deal with. Just be prepared for it. But you can't do that. What you can do is have the one that's in front of you, that's a part of you, and tell him, hey, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you didn't have it as hard as I did. And I'll guide you along the way to make everything better for you. And that in and of itself kind of reminds me, I can't expect to be that to someone else if I don't have myself together. So it does give you perspective on, okay, life has its ups and downs. It has its issues, but you got to be able to handle what's in front of you in order to help impart that to the person that comes after you. And once you understand that, and once you gain that perspective, it helps you freak out a lot less. I'm freaking out a lot less about, okay, what am I going to do with this kid? What am I going to tell him? And how am I going to handle it? And, you stop freaking out as much as, you do the best you can in the moment. And then you go from there.
I'm glad you just made me laugh there because I was ready to tear up a little bit. But isn't it kind of amazing that in the moment when you're younger, you definitely want to tune out your parents. You just think you think that they're clueless. They can't possibly understand what you're going through. And
I thought my parents were insane. I thought they were absolutely insane.
Yeah. And then it's just that they were giving you something for later. And if you would just listen, it's coming. It's coming. This thing is going to be useful later. Just open your ears, store it. It's not for now. It's for later. And maybe they probably needed to tell us that, it's not for now, it's for later. But God, that I know that I have those same things with my dad and my mom as well. And not to mention extended, elder family members and whatnot, but the amount of wisdom that people have imparted on me where I was just like, you're all fools, And, but I'm the idiot. I'm the idiot. You know what I mean? I'm the one that was, too brazen in the moment. And what I didn't realize was that was for later. And at least I listened. At least I heard it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I valued having just the ability to retain and memorize and remember stuff that I'm told, even if I didn't understand it at the time. And there were some times when my dad would give me the caveat. He's like, you're not going to get it now, but you'll understand it later. One of these days you'll get it. And it did allow me to understand it later from both a personal and a professional standpoint. I'm at the point now where, not only have I been in this business for more than a decade, I'm also to that point where, I'm approaching 40 and you can look back, you're like, wait a minute, I'm about to be 40. What's going on here? So I'm working with kids and, they're early to mid 20s and they're coming to me for advice. And I'm like, why are you coming to me? And then I'm like, wait a minute, I've been here a while. You kind of remember this isn't 2007. It's 2021. It's been a little bit. So you have to kind of remind yourself, hey, time has passed. You're a little bit further ahead now. And it kind of regrounds you. But it's to that point where I'm able to take some of the advice that I was given from other people, some of the stuff that Guy Junker and and Mike Jocks and Bob Pompiani told me, and I'm like able to pass that on to them and say, hey, this is what I've learned. And some of the things I've experienced for myself, like this is what I went through. You might go through it or you might not, but if you do, this is what you do or this is what you don't do. And it does become one of those things where not only do you remember stuff your parents told you and you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense now. Now you're the one giving advice and you're like, oh God, I sound like my dad. And it's so weird. It's so strange. And it's like, oh, you really, you don't grasp it at first. And then you kind of have that moment where you kind of step out of self and you're like, you're almost watching yourself giving someone else advice. It's so odd. A kid that's been producing with the sports department at KDK just got a job as a weekend news anchor in Steubenville. Dylan Cleveland is his name. Really good kid. And reminded me a lot of me because he had just graduated and was just trying to find that opportunity. He had done a lot of different things, worked a few different jobs at the same time, and really just worked hard and took every opportunity that they got. So I found out he got hired as a weekend news anchor, and I'm like throwing advice at him. And I'm like, dude, just soak up the opportunity. Like it's going to come at you like a whirlwind, but just take some of the time to just enjoy the moment. Because one of the things you'll look back on, and this is for me, was when you're starting out in TV, especially if you're in a smaller market, a lot of the people there are young because they're all starting their careers at the same time and they all have to start in the same dynamic. So the thing that I miss most is all of us being around each other and having the experience together. We're all learning together. We're all screwing up together, but we're enjoying each other's company. We're becoming friends. You're building relationships and we're having a great time. And to the point now where almost 10 years after the fact, people I worked with in one place, they're all spread out everywhere now. You know, I have friends in California. I have a friend that works in Boston. I have one that works in Florida. I have one that works in Texas. And we're all stretched out, but we're all having different experiences in our lives, but we're able to kind of come back and, you know, relive some of that stuff and the relationships that you get and like that you gain and that you build over time. It's really, really cool. I was able to go to a conference where it was like different phases of my career all at the same time, where people I had worked with who had given me so much help over the years to people that I had worked with and we'd grown together, and then people that I had worked with and kind of mentored, and they're all in the same place. And it's kind of like a weird, this is your lifetime kind of deal, but it does kind of put it all back in perspective. You're like, man, this is where I came from and this is what I've learned. But it's not just what you've been told, it's what you've actually applied and you've seen it work in practice. And now you can pass it on to someone else and it doesn't sound like crap because you're like, look, they've been through it. I've been through it. You're going to go through it too. So it does kind of help you a bit. But to your point, you're like, yeah, you hear stuff from before. You're like, whatever. And then you go through it. You're like, that's what they meant. I get it now. And
right. All of a sudden it registers. All of a sudden it's like the lever gets pulled and it's like, cha-ching. All right. That's it. It cashed in right there.
And when you have a kid, they happen more and more frequently. Like every day you're like, oh, I get what that means now. I understand. And it all adds up, man. And when it does, it's pretty cool. It's good confirmation.
I got to ask just because I got curious. Have you ever asked, now that these people are like basically half your age that are like moving into the workforce, like, have you ever asked like what their experiences are like in life and just kind of seeing like, if I'm going to give advice, does it even apply? Like, you know, like,
sometimes.
have you ever run into that? Like, did you ever hear any, like, or if you've asked, did you ever hear anything? You were like, maybe my advice here isn't exactly completely applicable, like maybe in a general sense, but not so much like not every kid is going through this anymore because life is a little bit different.
Every once in a while. I mean, some of it's been more, you know, specific in whatever category. And it's one of those things. It's like, you know, and someone will come to me with a question like, I don't know what to do about this. How do I handle this? And you try to get an understanding. And if it doesn't apply, it's one of those things. It's like, look, I don't know, but I can either help you find out, or I can find you someone who does know. And that comes down to the relationships you have too, because there's some things that I haven't been through or some things I haven't experienced or jobs I haven't worked, but I might have a friend who was a beat writer, or I might have a friend who's done whatever position that I've never held and say, hey, look, I don't really know, but let me send you to this guy who does know, or send you to this girl who does know. And it's one of those things where, you know, you do leverage those relationships that help you kind of help build those bridges when you're able to cross back at some of the ones you've crossed before. And yeah, sometimes there are times it's like, you know what? I don't know what to do about that, but I know someone else who does. So let me steer you in their direction. And it still does have that same sense of, okay, at least I helped them solve a problem or move them in the direction where you're solving the problem, even if I'm not directly involved in the result.
Right. Well, right on. So I don't want to keep you for too long. Like we're going hour and a half. Like it's
cool. My wife knows I'm talking to you. I told her. I'm like, I'm talking to Eli, so we're good. So she's like, oh, okay.
Well, regardless.
He says hi, by the way.
Oh, well, hey, Priscilla. But still, we're on the home stretch. But as much as I've been prodding you about like kind of like your background, a lot, actually more than of your personal life than maybe you thought I was going to. But what a waste if I don't ask you about some sports.
Let's go.
So I want 3 hot takes. We only have 3 big markets in town. So I need one about the Pirates, one about the Steelers, and one about the Penguins. Make it steamy.
Oh, okay. I'll start with the easy stuff. With the Pirates, learn to be patient. That's it. Because people want stuff to happen right away. The current situation that this group is in, this organization's in, talking about an organization that has very little talent at the top of it and very little depth in the middle. And you can't build a house if you don't have a solid foundation. The Pirates don't have one. It's going to take time to build one. You either want to wait for it to happen or you don't. So either get comfortable or get out, because this team's not going to be good for a couple years. They still got a couple draft picks that have to start to really build that foundation. They have a couple guys that they need to see what they are and if they are part of the future. And if they're not, then they got to move on. But if there's one guy I trust to help build that foundation, it's Ben Cherington, because he's done it before in his career. He did it in Boston. He did it under Theo Epstein, and Theo Epstein did it in 2 different places. So if you don't want to listen to what I'm telling you, go look up the results for yourself. Go do the research. You'll find the same things that I'm telling you are true. So as far as the Pirates go, you either get comfortable and get ready for the wait or go find something else to do because you're wasting your time.
Interesting, because I actually wanted to I wasn't sure if you were going to go there, but if you were, I was actually going to say, like, are you sure that the McCutchen and Cueto drop the ball thing was like a blip on the radar, and like it's really just been 20 plus years of like the same old thing?
No, that 3 years, 2013 to 2015. I hate when people try to discount it as if it didn't matter. It did. It mattered. And if nothing else, it showed you what could be. It gave you that glimpse, that precursor of this is what happens when you're actually on the right track. Now, did they follow through after that? No, that's what the problem was. They tasted success between 2013 and 2015, which, by the way, Andrew McCutchen, I like to remind people, Andrew McCutchen during that time period was pretty much the best player in baseball that wasn't named Mike Trout. Like that's how good he was in that span. He was a beast. So much so that like in 2017, when he started to decline, despite still being a pretty good player, everybody's like, oh, he's washed up. I'm like, no, he was just that good. That decline came from so high and it was such a far trip down that people think it was just so terrible. No, he just went from being really good to like slightly better than human. And you try to remind that to people. But yeah, that time period, I tell people all the time, you don't have to look at it as, oh, well, maybe it was just an aberration. No, that was things going the right way. They just didn't have the right things in place to keep it moving forward. But I'll come back to this. If I trust anybody to figure it out and start from the beginning and repeat the process over and over again, it's Ben Cherington, because he's already done it.
All right. So on to the Steelers. And what's your hot take?
There's a couple. I'll go with this one. Stop panicking about the offense. It's going to be better. I told people this last fall, and I have a couple people that I can direct you to that will confirm this. I told them Matt Canada is going to be the next offensive coordinator, and this offense is going to be better because you don't bring in Matt Canada to be a position coach, not a guy who turned Pitt into a 40-point per game offense 5 years ago. You know, he had Pitt scoring ridiculous numbers of points. And the quarterback on that team ended up going to the NFL when I don't think anybody thought that was possible. Did you really think Nathan Peterman would end up in the NFL? Matt Canada's offense made it look a lot better than it was. And I have to remind people, because I'm like, hey, did you like when Pitt beat Penn State? Did you like when they beat Clemson? You know what they did in those games? They scored 40 plus in both of them. Matt Canada had a lot to do with that. So if Matt Canada can do that with Pitt's offense 5 years ago, imagine what he can do with Ben Roethlisberger, a rebuilt offensive line, and the best running back in the draft, who just happened to be the career rusher at Alabama, which, by the way, turns out really good running backs. So just saying, a guy like that in that offense is going to make them a lot better. Don't panic. As far as the Penguins, enjoy what you have. You have it better than most people. Stop freaking out. Like, it seems weird that every message will give you stop freaking out. Go talk to a Maple Leafs fan. If you're that frustrated about what you're seeing, go talk to a Maple Leafs fan. They haven't been out of the first round of the playoffs since 2004. Okay, 5 years after that, the Penguins won their first Stanley Cup in the Crosby-Malkin era. And Leafs fans are still waiting for this first trip out of the first round. And they haven't won a championship since 1967, which, by the way, that was the year the Penguins started.
Right.
Get a little perspective. Like, you're talking about the most successful franchise, or at least one of the top 3 most successful franchises in the salary cap free agent lockout era of the NHL. You got it better than most. Let's stop with the chicken little skies falling stuff, because I get it. And this is coming from a guy who remembers when they won in 91. I think I was 9 years old when they went back to back in 91 and 92. And I remember thinking it was the greatest thing in the world. And I didn't know if it would happen again. And then it did. And now I'm like, you know what? We got it better than most. And sometimes just relax and remember sometimes.
We definitely have it better than most. I mean, there's few people that are going to see this many cups in their lifetime after the salary cap era. But so
I was lucky to witness Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, and Sidney Crosby. And I'm not even 40 yet.
Right. And you haven't even continued the list. Like you had Malkin, you had Letang, like we brought on a Jerome Iginla, like these, there are amazing names that have been in Pittsburgh.
God, 2013. Oh,
who was the guy who was so old and then like we won a cup with him a couple years back. No.
Bill Guerin, and then
it was our last one, the last one that we won.
Oh, I got to think back.
It's escaping me. It was like my hashtag that I kept using, and now I can't think of the goddamn name.
It wasn't Eaton, was it? Was it Eaton?
No.
It'll come back to me.
I'll throw it once I go back into my old tweets. I'll throw it in the I'll throw it in the description of the show. But yes. How do you think about Sullivan? Do you think that he's on the hot seat at all, or do you like? It's interesting that he's been around for as long as he's been around for a hockey coach. It's not typical to be around this long. You know, usually you got like a 5-year stay, and usually they ship you out.
It feels like that. It feels like with every hockey coach that's hired, they should have like the asterisk at the bottom for like infomercials, results not typical. It does feel like that way. But if there's any coach, and someone's going to yell in my ear about this later on, if there's any coach in the current era that at least has a bedrock principle or bedrock of principles that fit the current modern game, it's Mike Sullivan. He walked in the door talking about 3 things: possession, pursuit, and pace. Those being like the 3 pillars of his philosophy. They've stood up over time. Those things stand up over time. If you watch the most successful hockey teams right now in the NHL, possession of the puck has always been important. Pursuit defensively, and how well you're able to create difficult situations and turn those into transition offense and score. We saw the Islanders do quite a bit of it. And the pace of the game has changed. Can you drive the pace of the game, and can you actually dictate terms and bring the action to the other team in a more smothering fashion? Those are elements of the game that even since Mike Sullivan got to Pittsburgh have not eased up over time. Now, there have been small little more, specific details that have changed and that have not gone well, goaltending among them, which might be the first thing on the list for me. But the bedrock principles Mike Sullivan has, they stand up well over time, both in his time period here and how the global game of hockey looks right now.
Yeah, I hate to be the person that's like, goaltending was the problem, blah blah blah. But there were a couple games that would have gone the other way if everything but a few basically gimmies didn't go in. But
I've been telling people the difference between the Penguins and the Islanders in that series is that the Islanders had 2 healthy goaltenders that they trusted and the Penguins didn't.
And they showed the fuck up.
It did. It made all the difference in the world, because if Mike Sullivan could have gone to a healthy Casey DeSmith, he would have. He wouldn't have had Tristan Jarry play that long, and things probably wouldn't have gone the way they did. But since Casey DeSmith had injury issues, they didn't trust Maxime Legacy with good reason, and that was it.
I mean, that's a total wild card.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I guess from there, I don't really have a whole lot else for you. I always kind of let the guest end in the seat of the interviewer. So you get to ask a question of the people that will be eventually watching this. What do you want to know from the people that are watching this? What's something that you're curious about that you would like to have feedback from the people that are checking this out?
I'll ask this question to the younger professionals, those in your age bracket, maybe a little bit younger, because you're maybe 4 or 5 years behind me. So you're mid-30s, approaching mid-30s. You're approaching that age where you wake up hurting for no reason. You know what I'm talking about? But
I just came back from New Orleans, so I'm hurting for a very specific reason.
Fair enough. I want to hear from the people in your age bracket and maybe even a little bit younger, because this is something that I've had a conversation with quite a few people about. If you grew up in the era I did, because now they're calling my generation geriatric millennials. I was born in 1981. I knew I was on the cusp between Gen X and millennials. I understand that. I prefer the Oregon Trail generation. I think that's the best one. But,
I've never heard geriatric.
It's a new thing.
By the way,
geriatric millennials is a new
Christ.
thing. I'm I know I'm approaching 40, but seriously, don't call me old. I got nieces and nephews already calling me old.
Listen, here's the thing. I need to say this. You're only old if you have more regrets than you have dreams. And you can take that to the bank.
I'm stealing that one. I'm writing that down and stealing it. But I want to talk to that particular group of people between 30 and 39, pretty much. I want to hear from you guys, because we have seen some interesting things in our lifetimes. It's ranged from, if you were in my age group, the Challenger happening in your younger years, 9/11, the housing crisis, the Iraq War, a pandemic happening. We've seen so many things happen in a short span of time, and it's affected the world around us. And I feel like the folks ahead of us are kind of coming down on us with a whole bunch of stuff. And it's look, we didn't create these problems and they didn't come with a patent. Okay. So I want to hear from that group of people. I want to hear from those between 30 and 39, because odds are, if I'm talking to you right now, you're probably thinking about getting married. You're maybe thinking about buying a home. You're maybe thinking about having kids, and you're wondering how the hell you're going to pull it off, because for whatever reason, maybe you're not making enough money. Maybe you're still paying off student loans. Maybe you haven't been able to shake the whole thing of, maybe you had books on a credit card in college and you're still trying to pay it off because the interest rate shot through the roof.
1, 2, 3.
Right here too. I'm dealing with the same thing. I want to hear from you about how this most recent particular set of circumstances, how has it changed your world? Because I know how it's changed mine, and I know how it's changed my perspective, but my wife and I had the opportunity to start a family, and we've done that. But for those of you who want to do those things, what's holding you back, or what's been the thing that's kind of standing in the way? Because there are so many different factors. And I don't think people who are older than us, maybe our parents' generation or the generation before that, I don't think they remember back to when they were our age, because the stuff we're going through now, they were younger when they were dealing with stuff, because life moved at a much different pace back then. when you were my parents' age, you can get married in your late teens and have a job to share the rest of your life by your 20s. My dad had the same job from when he was like 19, 20 years old until the day he died. You know, my mom did the same job for almost 30 years, and they got married in their late teens. Our generation could never pull that off in a million years. Things are just different. But my question to you is, how has the world in the last maybe 2 years reshaped how you feel about your career, about your life, and the things you want to do? Because I could sit here and tell you that I have the blueprint of how it can get better. I don't. A lot of it, seriously, was just circumstances change and maybe even a little bit of pure luck. But not everybody's in the same position I am. But what's holding you back from getting where you want to be? And what do you think needs to change for you to get there? Because I'm here to tell you, it's there. The options are there. It's just going to take you a little bit longer than you might normally have to find it. You just got to know where to look. Or sometimes you're going to have to be in the right place at the right time. But it can get better. It's just a matter of understanding the route you have to take to get there. But it's not impossible.
I love it. Even I have a perspective on luck, which is luck is just opportunities that you're prepared to take advantage of. Like you may not have set it up for yourself, but you did everything else that you needed to do, that when it dropped in your lap, you're ready for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a friend of mine that I've worked with for years, my buddy Matt Fargo. His story by itself is amazing. This kid was actually doing play-by-play for like high school events when he was like 14 years old, and, you know, started his own network online. And I started calling games with him. That's how I got the experience I got to start doing it now for Duquesne. This guy, in the meantime, ends up taking a job with the Harlem Globetrotters and was their announcer for like 2 years. And he's traveling the world. He's in his early 30s. But all the stuff that he dealt with being a teenager and being kicked out of certain events because they thought he was some kid trying to sneak in. They didn't realize he was actually trying to work. Like, it's insane. Like the stuff that we went through working together. And now we look at our past now and we're like, dude, how did we get here? And we kind of laugh about it, but we always called ourselves the underdogs. And now we get to that point where we're like, dude, we've actually done a few things in our lifetime. But yeah, it is one of those things. It's like, we've had so many different things happen in the past. We get to this point now. It's like, man, remember we were dealing with the other stuff before? We weren't making any money. And we're like, you know, trying to chip in on gas to drive to state college for a state championship game. And now he's like traveled the world. And, you know, I've kind of set my own base here in our local market. And we laugh at it now. It's just like the way things kind of come together and the way they evolve is really, really funny. But you're right. It's preparation meeting opportunity.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. So lastly, tell the people where they can reach you, your shows, your show times, your social medias, like all the things. Like, where can they find you?
Oh, all the things. Wow.
Or at least the ones you want them to. You don't have to do all of them.
The simple stuff, as far as TV is concerned, my schedule's kind of sporadic because I work, you know, depending on basically when I'm needed, because I'm a freelancer. But KDK TV, Channel 2, if you're in Pittsburgh. If you're not, you can check us out on CBSN. Just search for CBSN Pittsburgh. You can find us there. A lot of our news programs are streamed now, so you can watch those. For the radio side, 93.7 The Fan. I usually work weekend mornings. I used to host a show called The Sunday Morning Grind, but now it's a little bit more sporadic where my times vary on Sunday mornings because they're trying to get back into the rhythm of having a bunch of guys rotating on a schedule again. But if you have the Odyssey app, AUDACY, download that app. You can listen to 93.7 The Fan on your cell phone, or you can listen online, 937thefan.com. You can check me out there. As far as social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Josh Taylor HD. Really, really simple. That's the easiest place to find me.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I'm so psyched that we finally got to do this. And man, like, I just have to be honest. It's been amazing to literally, and I'm so proud to be able to watch my friend literally rise to success. Like, I literally watch him rise to success. So, I thank you for the time, because I know that it's not exactly in excess these days. And man, this was amazing. Longer than I thought it was going to, but every minute of it I wouldn't take back.
Dude, I don't think you and I ever have short conversations. Like when we do get the opportunity to talk, I don't think they've ever been short conversations. But it is cool because I do a lot of different like media opportunities. I do a lot of opportunities to do public speaking and different events and stuff like that. It's different when it's someone you've known before all this started. Because I have a couple of friends that have radio shows or podcasts, and it's like when I get to link up with them again, it's like it's right back to where we were. This felt like 2004, 2005, over at the Pink House. You know what I'm talking about? It feels like those days again. And that never gets old for me. So when I get the chance to talk to somebody who I've had that relationship with even long before all this stuff happened, it makes it so much more sweeter, because it's someone that I know understands and appreciates the journey. And I can't explain it, man. It's a crazy, crazy ride. If Lou Gehrig was still alive, he and I would have a good debate about who's the luckiest man in the world. That's all I'll say. But I appreciate the time, man. I love talking to you always.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We gotta, I mean, I haven't seen you since last summer. I have some theories about that night, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that off recording.
Hey, I'm not too far from where we were last time. And we were talking about reaching out to those guys to get together again. So, and we bring the little guy out, and the topic of conversation, of course. So,
but I just had, I mean, I always appreciate people giving me the time, because this is literally nothing. It's mostly just keeping a relationship. So, thank you. And, dude, we will hang soon.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you, brother.
All right.